She thought the millionaire was going to leave, gave him one last kiss, and confessed her love. Everyone in the hospital was shocked, including the wife. The heart monitor showed irregular beats as Charlotte Edwards adjusted Marcus Harrison's IV for the last time that night. Her hands trembled slightly as she carried out the procedure, not from lack of experience, after all it had been 2 years, as a private nurse at the imposing Harrison Mansion in Greenwich, Connecticut, but from the weight of the news the doctors had given her just a few hours before. "Prepare for the worst. He may not make it through the night," were the words of Dr. Reynolds, a specialist in autoimmune diseases at Greenwich Hospital. The rare condition attacking Marcus's immune system had worsened dramatically in the last 48 hours, landing him in intensive care. Charlotte observed the serene face of the 45-year-old man, who, despite his debilitation, retained traces of the elegance that characterized him as one of the most respected businessmen in the pharmaceutical sector. His gray hair at his temples and the expression lines around his eyes told stories of difficult decisions and memorable achievements. The hospital corridor was bustling that evening. Members of the Harrison Pharmaceuticals board were taking turns in tense conversations about the future of the company. Among them, Charlotte recognized Richard Palmer, the ambitious vice president,
who barely disguised his anxiety about the possible death of the CEO.
Nurse Edwards. The nasalized voice of Victoria Harrison, Marcus's younger sister, cut through her thoughts. "We need to discuss the arrangements, you know." Her falsely regretful tone couldn't hide the calculating glint in her eyes. Victoria had never hidden her resentment at Marcus taking full control of the company after her parents' death. "With all due respect, Mrs. Harrison, now is not the time," Charlotte replied firmly, maintaining the professional composure she had cultivated over the years. Deep down, her heart wrenched at the thought of losing not only her patient, but the man for whom she harbored deep and secret feelings. The unexpected arrival of Amanda Harrison, the wife who abandoned Marcus 3 years ago for a tennis instructor in California, caused a stir in the hallway. Her convenient return came as no surprise to Charlotte, who was well aware of the clause in the will that guaranteed a considerable share of the fortune to the wife, even after the unofficial separation. "Dear Marcus," Amanda pronounced theatrically, as she entered the room, her high heels echoing on the hospital floor. "I can't believe this is happening." Charlotte felt her stomach turn. For 2 years she had been more than a nurse to Marcus. She had been his confidant during sleepless nights, his chess partner on quiet afternoons, and the only person who really cared about his well-being beyond the medical reports. Memories flooded her mind, the conversations about classical literature in the mansion's library, the shared laughter at Marcus's clumsy attempts at cooking, even against her recommendations, and the moments of vulnerability when he admitted his fears about the future. "All those interested in the will have arrived," muttered James Mitchell, the family lawyer to Victoria, in the hallway. Charlotte felt her heart squeeze even tighter. It was as if Marcus's life had turned into a morbid play, where every character was anxiously awaiting the grand finale. When Dr. Reynolds announced that only the family could stay in the room, Charlotte used her medical authority to stay. Her professional duty was a convenient excuse to remain by the side of the man who had unknowingly captured her heart. The minutes dragged on like hours. The sound of the heart monitor seemed more and more distant, and Charlotte felt that every moment could be her last. It was then, in an impulse that defied years of professional self-discipline, that she approached the bed. "Marcus," she whispered, her tears finally winning the battle against professionalism. "You changed my life in ways I never imagined possible. Your kind heart, your strength in the face of adversity. His voice faltered momentarily. "I fell in love with you." The silence that followed was deafening. Charlotte leaned over and in a gesture of pure emotion placed a soft kiss on his lips. That's when she noticed the shocked looks around her, the Harrison family, the executives, Amanda, all witnessing her most intimate declaration. But the real shock came next. Marcus's eyes slowly opened, focusing directly on hers. A small smile formed on his lips, and his hand, which everyone thought was too weak to move, reached for hers. "Charlotte," his voice was only a whisper, but it carried a strength that no one expected. "I heard every word. The heart monitor began to register stronger and more regular beats, as if Marcus's heart had found a new reason to fight. Dr. Reynolds's astonished expression as he checked his vital signs confirmed the inexplicable Marcus Harrison was reacting. The room descended into silent chaos. Victoria let out a sigh of indignation. Amanda visibly paled, and the executives exchanged nervous glances. But for Charlotte and Marcus, the outside world had disappeared. At that moment there was only the truth that they had both held in for so long, finally free from the bonds of silence. It was the beginning of a story that none of those present could have predicted, a story that would prove that true love has the power to defy not only death, but also the social conventions, greed, and prejudices that surrounded them. The morning sun seeped through the shutters of the hospital room, illuminating a scene that no one could have predicted 12 hours earlier. Marcus Harrison, the man the doctors had sentenced to death, was sitting up in his bed, considerably more alert, while Dr. Reynolds examined his vital signs with an expression of genuine perplexity. "It's simply remarkable," murmured the doctor, adjusting his glasses as he reviewed the latest tests. "Her antibody levels are stabilizing in a way we haven't seen for months." Charlotte stood in the corner of the room, her nurse's uniform slightly creased after the long night. Her hands were still shaking as she remembered the confession she had made, the kiss she had given, and Marcus's unexpected response. The initial embarrassment had given way to an electric tension in the air, amplified by the furious looks Amanda was throwing in his direction. "This is absolutely irregular," protested Amanda, her designer dress contrasting with the hospital environment. "A nurse taking advantage of a vulnerable patient, I demand that she be removed from the case immediately." Marcus, who until then had maintained a contemplative silence, raised his hand in a gesture that instantly silenced his wife. "Amanda, you lost the right to demand anything the moment you decided to leave with Sebastian for San Diego." Victoria Harrison, who had spent the night making frantic calls to her lawyers, interrupted the discussion. "Marcus, we need to discuss the company's situation. The shareholders are nervous and Richard Palmer is threatening to call an extraordinary board meeting." "The only thing that will be discussed now," Marcus replied with surprising firmness for someone on the brink of death, "is why my family seems more interested in my will than in my recovery." The silence that followed was deafening. Charlotte watched as those present stirred uncomfortably, their true intentions exposed by Marcus's frankness. James Mitchell, the lawyer, sniffed nervously as he put away a folder that undoubtedly contained the will they had all been waiting to see. "Charlotte," Marcus's voice called out softer now, "could you be alone with me for a moment?" The protests were immediate. Amanda began to object vehemently. Victoria muttered something about conflict of interest, and Richard Palmer, who had just entered the room, began a speech about corporate protocols. "Get out!" Marcus's order was clear and definitive. "All of you." One by one they left the room, Amanda being the last, casting a venomous glance at Charlotte before slamming the door. Dr. Reynolds, after once again checking her vital signs, also left, still shaking his head in amazement at her inexplicable recovery. When they were finally alone, the weight of the last 12 hours fell on Charlotte's shoulders. "Mr. Harrison E., I'm sorry for my lack of professionalism. I understand if you want me to resign." "Charlotte," Marcus interrupted her, holding out his hand to her. "Come here." With hesitant steps, she approached the bed. Marcus took her hand, and the touch sent shivers down her spine. "You brought me back," he said softly. "Not just last night, but during these 2 years. Your presence, your care, your dedication went far beyond professional duty. I never wanted to jeopardize our professional relationship," Charlotte began, but Marcus squeezed her hand lightly, silencing her. "When Amanda left me," he continued, "I thought I'd never be able to trust anyone again. Then you arrived with your quiet gentleness and your discreet strength. You made me believe again, not just in the possibility of healing, but in the ability to love." Tears began to stream down Charlotte's face. Marcus gently dried them with, his thumb a gesture so intimate that it made her heart soar. "But there are complications," she whispered, aware of the world beyond those walls. "Your family, the company Amanda." "There will always be complications," Marcus replied with a tired smile. "But last night, when I thought I was dying, I realized that the only truly unbearable complication would be leaving without having told you how I feel." The heart monitor registered an acceleration in Marcus's heartbeat, making Charlotte smile through her tears. "As a nurse, I should ask you to calm down." "As a woman?" he asked, his eyes fixed on hers. "As a woman," she replied, leaning slightly towards him, "I should tell you that your heart is beating exactly as it should." The moment was interrupted by a firm knock on the door. It was James Mitchell, the lawyer, with a grave expression. "Mr. Harrison, we need to discuss some urgent matters. Amanda is threatening to file a lawsuit alleging emotional manipulation and questioning your ability to make decisions." Marcus didn't let go of Charlotte's hand. "James, schedule a meeting with the board for this afternoon. It's time to make some significant changes at Harrison Pharmaceuticals." Charlotte tried to pull away, but Marcus kept her firmly by his side. "And Charlotte will stay here. She's part of those changes now." The lawyer nodded, understanding the implicit message. As he left, Charlotte could hear the growing buzz in the corridor. A new battle was about to begin, but this time neither Marcus nor Charlotte would be alone in facing it. The meeting room at Greenwich Hospital vibrated with tension as Marcus Harrison was wheeled in his wheelchair. Charlotte stood discreetly by his side, monitoring his vital signs, while the board members of Harrison Pharmaceuticals settled into their leather chairs around the oval table. Richard Palmer, the vice chairman, drummed his fingers nervously on the polished surface of the table. Victoria Harrison took her seat to Marcus's right, her lips pressed together in a thin line of disapproval. Amanda, who had insisted on taking part, was sitting next to her personal lawyer, a stern-looking man called Douglas Whitman. "Ladies and gentlemen of the board," Marcus began, his voice stronger than anyone would have expected after his near death. "I thank you all for attending this extraordinary meeting. As you can see, the rumors about my death were somewhat premature." A murmur went through the room. Charlotte noticed the furtive glances exchanged between the executives, especially those who less than 24 hours ago had been anxiously discussing the succession of the company. "Marcus," interrupted Richard Palmer, "with all due respect, your current condition raises serious concerns about your ability to continue leading the company." The shareholders," Marcus cut him off, "will be pleased to know that I am more clear-headed and determined than ever. Dr. Reynolds, please." The doctor, who was waiting outside, entered the room carrying a folder of tests. "The results are surprising," he explained, handing out copies of the reports. "Mr. Harrison is making an unprecedented recovery. His immune markers are stabilizing and all vital functions are normalizing." "That's irrelevant," Amanda interjected, her voice laced with venom. "The issue here is the unethical behavior of a certain employee." Her eyes fixed on Charlotte with barely concealed hostility. Marcus held up his hand, silencing his ex-wife. "Amanda, you renounced any right to have a say in my personal or professional life when you chose to leave. But since you brought it up, let's get a few things straight." He gestured to James Mitchell, who began handing out documents to those present. Charlotte felt her heart race when she realized they were divorce papers. "These documents make the end of my marriage to Amanda official," Marcus announced, "including a clause that nullifies any right she has to the company or my personal assets, considering the abandonment documented 3 years ago." Amanda stood up abruptly, her face red with fury. "You can't do that. I have rights." "Your rights ended when you chose Sebastian and his tennis academy in San Diego," Marcus replied calmly. "The lawyers have already confirmed the validity of the documents." Victoria, who until then had maintained a calculated silence, leaned forward. "What about the nurse? Are we going to ignore the blatant conflict of interest?" Charlotte. Edwards. Marcus emphasized her name. Not only saved my life with her professional dedication, but also demonstrated an integrity that many in this room could learn from. Charlotte felt the weight of the stares on her, but she stood her ground, concentrating on her professional role while disguising the swirl of emotions inside her. In addition, Marcus continued, I'd like to announce some changes to the company structure. First, I will be starting a new research division focused on rare autoimmune diseases inspired by my own experience. Secondly, Richard Palmer is being transferred to our subsidiary in Detroit. Palmer stood up, protesting vehemently, but Marcus continued. And third, I will be reorganizing the board to include members who truly care about the future of the company and the well-being of our patients, not just their own financial interests. Chaos ensued in the room. Victoria demanded explanations, Amanda shouted about lawsuits, and several executives argued heatedly amongst themselves. Charlotte watched everything with a mixture of admiration and concern, keeping a close eye on Marcus's vital signs. One more thing. Marcus raised his voice above the din. Charlotte isn't just my nurse. She's the person who showed me that there is still humanity in the corporate world, and I intend to have her by my side both personally and professionally from now on. The silence that followed was deafening. Charlotte felt her cheeks burn but maintained her professional posture, even when Marcus gently took her hand. This is an outrage, protested Victoria. The council will never accept. The board, Marcus interrupted her, will have to adapt to the changes or find somewhere else to exercise their greed. This company was founded by our parents with the aim of helping people, not accumulating power. Dr. Reynolds, who was watching the scene with medical interest, made a note on his clipboard. I must say that this emotional agitation is not recommended for your current state, Mr. Harrison. On the contrary, Doctor. Marcus smiled, still holding Charlotte's hand. I've never felt more alive. The meeting ended amid protests and veiled threats, but Marcus remained unfazed. As Charlotte led him back to his hospital room, he looked exhausted, but satisfied. You've just started a war, she commented softly, helping him to settle into bed. No, he replied, his eyes shining with determination. I've just ended one that's gone on too long, and with you by my side, I'm ready to face any battle that comes my way. Charlotte adjusted her heart monitor, aware that her life had changed irrevocably in the last 24 hours. The future was uncertain, but for the first time in a long time, it was full of hopeful possibilities. The news of Marcus Harrison's miraculous recovery and the events of the board meeting spread quickly through the corridors of Greenwich Hospital. Charlotte watched from the window of her hospital room as reporters began to flock to the entrance, eager for details about the dramatic return of the CEO of Harrison Pharmaceuticals. They're like vultures, Marcus commented from his bed, leafing through documents that James Mitchell had brought in earlier. Always waiting for the right moment to strike. Charlotte adjusted the digital thermometer on his arm, trying to maintain her professionalism despite the intimacy they now shared. His vital signs remain stable, but he still needs rest. How can I rest with Victoria organizing a corporate riot? He smiled, but Charlotte noticed the concern in his eyes. James informed me that she's contacting major shareholders trying to question my mental capacity. A soft knock on the door interrupted the conversation. It was Elena Martinez, the hospital's social worker, a middle-aged woman with kind eyes and a firm posture. Mr. Harrison, Ms. Edwards. I'm sorry to intrude, but we need to discuss some delicate matters. Charlotte made a move to leave, but Marcus took her hand. What she has to say, she can say in Charlotte's presence. Elena nodded, consulting her notes. We've received a formal complaint from Ms. Amanda Harrison alleging unethical conduct and possible emotional manipulation on the part of Nurse Edwards. The hospital's ethics committee needs to investigate. Charlotte's face paled. Years of dedication to her career could be destroyed by a malicious accusation. Marcus noticed her discomfort and squeezed her hand tighter. This is ridiculous, he protested. Charlotte has always been extremely professional. If there's any initiative here, it was mine. Eleanor raised her hand in a calming gesture. I understand the situation, but we need to follow the protocols. Miss Edwards, you will be temporarily removed from the case while the investigation takes place. I don't accept that, Marcus declared, trying to sit up straighter in bed. Charlotte is essential to my recovery. Mr. Harrison, Eleanor continued gently. That's exactly the kind of statement we need to avoid at the moment. The emotional closeness between you needs to be evaluated considering the professional context. Charlotte felt tears forming, but held them back. I understand, Ms. Martinez. I will cooperate with the investigation. At that moment, Dr. Reynolds entered the room, followed by a nurse Charlotte didn't recognize. This is Claire Wilson. She will be taking over Mr. Harrison's care temporarily. The exchange of glances between Charlotte and Marcus was charged with restrained emotion. She began to gather her belongings, her hands shaking slightly as she organized her medical notes. This isn't going to stay like this, Marcus whispered as she leaned over to check her monitors one last time. I'll sort it out. Charlotte just nodded, maintaining her professional posture as she left the room. In the corridor, she found Victoria Harrison talking quietly to Richard Palmer. Ah, my brother's favorite nurse, Victoria sneered. Looks like your little fairy tale has come to an end. Excuse me, Charlotte replied coldly, walking past them with her head held high. In her small apartment in Stamford 30 minutes later, Charlotte finally allowed the tears to fall. The last 48 hours had seemed like a dream, or a nightmare from which she was being brutally awakened. Her phone rang, displaying an unfamiliar number. Ms. Edwards, this is Catherine Walsh. From the law firm Walsh & Associates. Mr. Harrison has hired us to represent you during the ethics investigation. Charlotte blinked in surprise. I can't accept that. I already seem compromised enough. Ms. Edwards, the lawyer, continued, you have the right to defend yourself properly. Furthermore, we have evidence that this investigation was orchestrated by parties interested in harming both you and Mr. Harrison. A second phone call, this time from James Mitchell, brought more revelations. Charlotte, we discovered emails between Victoria and Amanda planning this weeks ago. They've been waiting for the right moment to act. The doorbell rang, startling her. Through the peephole, Charlotte saw Elena Martinez. Hesitantly, she opened the door. May I come in? Elena asked gently. There's something you need to know. Over the next hour, Elena revealed that years earlier she had witnessed a similar case at the hospital. Amanda Harrison, then a newly graduated nurse, had become involved with a wealthy patient who would later become her husband, Marcus. History is repeating itself, Elena explained, but with one crucial difference. Amanda manipulated the situation to her advantage. You, Charlotte, genuinely care about Marcus as well as maintaining your professional integrity until the last moment. Charlotte absorbed the information, beginning to understand Amanda's particular resentment. Why are you telling me this? Because I believe in justice, Elena replied, and because I've seen how you've looked after Marcus over the last 2 years. It wasn't just professionalism, it was true humanity. Charlotte's phone rang again. It was Marcus using James's cell phone. Charlotte, don't give up. We're finding out more every hour. Victoria and Amanda won't win this time. As night fell over Stamford, Charlotte sat on her small balcony watching the city lights. Her life had changed completely in a matter of days, but for the first time she wasn't alone in her battle. Her phone vibrated with a message from Marcus. Some people fight love because they've never truly experienced it. We have something they can't destroy. Charlotte smiled through her tears, knowing that the real battle had only just begun. Catherine Walsh's office on the 20th floor of a building in Manhattan offered a panoramic view of the city that Charlotte barely noticed. Her attention was focused on the documents spread out on the mahogany desk, printed emails, old hospital records, and photos that told a story she could never have imagined. As you can see, Catherine explained, adjusting her gold-framed glasses. Amanda Harrison, or rather Amanda Peterson at the time, had quite an interesting history before she met Marcus. Charlotte examined the records of 3 different hospitals in Connecticut, all with complaints filed against Amanda for inappropriate behavior with wealthy patients. In each case, the investigations were mysteriously closed before any conclusion was reached. But how come this never came to light? Charlotte asked, her professional mind struggling to process the implications. Money buys a lot of silence, James Mitchell replied, entering the room with a new briefcase. And the Peterson family had a lot of money at the time, enough to bury scandals and rewrite histories. One detail in particular caught Charlotte's eye, a photo of Amanda with Victoria Harrison dated 6 months before Amanda met Marcus. They already knew each other. Catherine smiled, pleased that Charlotte had noticed this crucial detail. Victoria was looking for a way to gain more control over the company. Marcus was completely dedicated to his work after the death of his parents, ignoring her attempts to participate more actively in the management. So Amanda was planted. Charlotte felt her stomach turn at the revelation. A beautiful and apparently dedicated nurse caring for Marcus during a complicated pneumonia, James continued. Victoria knew her brother was vulnerable at the time. It was all meticulously planned. Charlotte's phone vibrated. It was a message from Elena Martinez. I've gained access to the full ethics committee records. You need to see this in person. Go, Catherine encouraged. James and I will keep building the case. The more evidence we have, the better. At Greenwich Hospital, Elena was waiting in her office with a grave expression. What I've discovered goes beyond your current situation, she explained, closing the door. There are serious irregularities involving Harrison Pharmaceuticals research over the last 3 years. The years when Amanda was married to Marcus, Charlotte observed. Exactly. Mysteriously abandoned projects, altered data, manipulated results, all pointing to a much bigger scheme. Charlotte felt her heart racing. Marcus's illness. It started shortly after Amanda left him, Elena added. The symptoms are consistent with progressive poisoning by certain experimental substances. The horror of the realization hit Charlotte like a punch. Her hands shook as she reached for her phone, but before she could make any calls, Victoria Harrison appeared at the office door. What an interesting meeting, she commented with false casualness. Sharing. More lies about my family, Elena. The only lies here are yours, Victoria, Elena replied calmly, discreetly, reaching for an emergency button under her desk. You don't understand. Victoria advanced into the office, closing the door behind her. Everything I did was to protect the family legacy. Marcus was destroying everything with his obsession with ethical research and social responsibility. Trying to kill your own brother. Charlotte confronted, her voice shaking with anger. Amanda was just supposed to keep him distracted, weakened. Victoria revealed her mask of composure beginning to crack. The plan was to force him to retire, not... She stopped abruptly, realizing she had said too much. The door opened, revealing hospital security and 2 detectives. Victoria Harrison, one of them announced, we need you to accompany us for some questioning. As Victoria was escorted out, Charlotte rushed into Marcus's room. He was sitting on the bed talking to Catherine Walsh. Charlotte, he asked, noticing her troubled expression. Marcus, we've discovered. It's worse than we thought. She began, her hands automatically checking his vital signs as she reported everything she had discovered. Catherine took notes furiously. This changes everything. It's not just a question of hospital ethics, now we're talking attempted murder, corporate fraud. What about Amanda? Marcus asked, his voice hoarse with emotion. She's already being sought, Catherine replied. But apparently she left the country last night. Charlotte held Marcus' hand, feeling him tremble slightly. How could I have missed it? He muttered. My own sister. You saw what you wanted to see, Charlotte replied softly. We all do that sometimes. The important thing is that the truth is coming out now. Dr. Reynolds entered the room carrying new tests. Well, that explains a lot. We've started a specific detox protocol. Mr. Harrison, with proper treatment, your full recovery is only a matter of time. As night fell over, Greenwich Charlotte remained by Marcus's side, officially reinstated as his nurse after a quick meeting of the ethics committee. The truth, though painful, had set them both free, and with it came the promise of a new beginning. You know, Marcus commented, watching the city lights through the window. I always wondered why I felt healthier when you were around. Now, I know that you were literally saving me even if you didn't know it. Charlotte adjusted her pillow, smiling softly. I guess some people are meant to save each other in many different ways. The night promised to be long, with investigators still gathering evidence and lawyers preparing documents, but for the first time in years, the future seemed clear and full of hope. The Greenwich Police Department was buzzing with activity that morning as Charlotte accompanied Marcus in his testimony. The revelations about the conspiracy involving Victoria and Amanda had triggered a federal investigation, especially considering the implications for the pharmaceutical industry. Ms. Edwards called Detective Sarah Morrison a 40-something woman with piercing eyes. We need your statement separately. Charlotte cast a worried glance at Marcus, who nodded encouragingly. Go on. James is on his way to accompany my statement. In the interrogation room, Charlotte meticulously described her observations of the last 2 years. Every unexplained symptom from Marcus, every suspicious visit from Amanda, every strange behavior from Victoria, everything took on new meaning in the light of recent discoveries. Your nursing records were impeccable, commented Detective Morrison, leafing through a thick file. In fact, it was your detailed notes on the changes in symptoms that helped us establish the pattern of poisoning. I should have known better, Charlotte muttered, guilt weighing heavily on her shoulders. Don't blame yourself, Morrison replied firmly. Victoria and Amanda were experienced in manipulation. We've just discovered that they tried something similar in Boston 5 years ago with another executive. The door opened and Catherine Walsh entered, carrying new documentation. We found the transactions. Victoria embezzled millions from Harrison Pharmaceuticals through a network of shell companies. The money was used to bribe people and cover up her schemes. And Marcus? Charlotte asked, her professional and personal concern mixing. He's cooperating fully, Catherine replied. The FBI is particularly interested in the research projects that were sabotaged. Apparently, some of them were promising treatments for rare diseases. Charlotte's phone vibrated. It was Elena Martinez, with an update from the hospital. The ethics committee has not only dropped all charges against you, but is recommending a full investigation into Amanda's previous cases. When Charlotte returned to the main room, she found Marcus talking to an FBI agent. His face was pale but determined. When he saw her, he held out his hand, which she grasped instinctively. We need to make a statement to the press, James Mitchell announced, entering the room. Harrison Pharmaceuticals shares are plummeting on the rumors. We have to control the narrative. No, Marcus replied surprisingly. Let's tell the whole truth. No more secrets and manipulations. Our company was founded to help people, and that's what we're going to do. The police department conference room was quickly transformed into a press conference venue. Charlotte watched from the sidelines, as Marcus, still visibly weak but with unshakable dignity, faced the cameras. Harrison Pharmaceuticals went through an identity crisis, he began. We allowed greed and personal ambition to override our original mission. That ends today. Reporters bombarded questions, but Marcus continued, We are cooperating fully with the authorities. Every abandoned project will be re-evaluated. Every penny embezzled will be traced. And most importantly, we will resume our mission to develop affordable treatments for rare diseases. Mr. Harrison, shouted a reporter, is it true that your private nurse uncovered the conspiracy? Marcus looked at Charlotte, a soft smile on his lips. Ms. Edwards is not just an exceptional nurse. She's living proof that integrity and compassion still have a place in the corporate world. Back at the hospital, where Marcus needed to continue his detox treatment, Charlotte found a pile of letters at the nurse's station. They were from patients and family members who had been impacted by her decisions over the years. "You've built up a whole support network without even realizing it," Marcus commented, watching her read the letters in her room. "As have you," she replied, showing emails from Harrison Pharmaceuticals employees expressing support and offering additional information about Victoria's suspicious activities. Dr. Reynolds came in with new test results. "The detox is progressing well, but I need to ask you a difficult question. When was the last time you two really rested?" Charlotte and Marcus exchanged guilty glances. The last few weeks had been an emotional roller coaster with no break. "I thought about it," the doctor continued. "As soon as you're discharged, Marcus, I suggest a few weeks of recovery away from here. I have a colleague with a private clinic in Vermont." "Vermont?" Charlotte asked in surprise. "A quiet place in the Green Mountains," Reynolds explained, "specializing in executive recovery. And yes, Charlotte, you'd be welcome as part of the medical team if you'd like." The idea of green mountains and clean air seemed like a distant dream in the midst of the current chaos, but it also offered a promise of healing, not just physical, but emotional. "We could rebuild," Marcus said softly, not just referring to the company. "Start again with more solid foundations." Charlotte adjusted her heart monitor, allowing her fingers to rest a moment longer on her wrist. "A complete rebuild takes time." "Time is something you've given me back," he replied, taking her hand. "And I intend to use it wisely this time." The private clinic in the Green Mountains emerged from the morning mist like a refuge isolated from the outside world. Located in Stowe, Vermont, the 5-acre property combined modern architecture with the rusticity of the mountain landscape. Charlotte watched the arrival through the car window while Marcus slept in the back seat, exhausted from the 4-hour journey from Greenwich. "Welcome to Greenhaven Retreat," announced Dr. Melissa Chen, the clinic's medical director, as she greeted them at the entrance. "Dr. Reynolds updated me on the situation. We have everything ready for the treatment to continue." The interior of the clinic conveyed an atmosphere of calculated serenity, soft shades of green and blue, comfortable furniture, and large windows that framed the majestic mountains. Charlotte helped Marcus settle into his suite, noting with approval the medical equipment discreetly integrated into the environment. "It's more like a luxury resort than a clinic," Marcus commented, noting the stone fireplace that dominated the private living room. "That's the idea," Dr. Chen explained. "Recovery happens better when patients don't feel like patients. Charlotte, your room is adjacent with a communicating door for medical emergencies." While organizing the medication schedule, Charlotte received an urgent message from Catherine Walsh. "Amanda has been located in Mexico. FBI is moving for extradition. Keep Marcus focused on recovery, we'll deal with it." "Is there a problem?" Marcus asked, noticing her tense expression. "Nothing you need to worry about right now," she replied, adjusting the portable heart monitor. "Your only task is to rest and recover." The days at the clinic followed a rhythm of their own. In the mornings, physiotherapy sessions helped Marcus regain the strength he had lost during the poisoning period. Afternoons were dedicated to occupational therapy and consultations with specialists, including a toxicologist who developed a personalized detox protocol. Charlotte alternated between her professional duties and moments of personal connection with Marcus. During supervised walks through the clinic's gardens, they talked about their hopes and fears, building an intimacy that went beyond the nurse-patient relationship. "Do you know what scares me the most?" Marcus confessed during one of these walks a week after they arrived. "It's not Victoria's betrayal or Amanda's actions. It's realizing how much time I've wasted building walls around myself." Charlotte adjusted his scarf against the autumn wind. "Walls can protect, but they can also isolate. The important thing is to know when it's time to tear them down." A therapy group for recovering executives met 3 times a week in the solarium. Charlotte watched from afar as Marcus shared his story, surprised by his vulnerability. Other CEOs and corporate directors recounted similar experiences of betrayal and exhaustion. "It's almost a silent epidemic," commented Dr. Chen, joining Charlotte in her observation. People at the top seemingly having it all but surrounded by those who just want to take advantage. One night, during a particularly strong storm, Charlotte found Marcus gazing at the mountains through the windows of his suite. His heart monitor showed a slight elevation in his heart rate. "Can't sleep?" she asked softly. "I was thinking about my parents," he replied without turning around. They built Harrison Pharmaceuticals from scratch, always prioritizing research that could help people. At some point, I lost that direction. Charlotte approached, stopping beside him. "There's still time to get back on track." "With you by my side?" he asked, finally turning to face her. "As your nurse, or—" She let the question hang in the air, aware of the fine line that still existed between them. Marcus touched her face gently. "As my partner. In every way." The moment was interrupted by the ringing of Charlotte's phone. It was James Mitchell with urgent news. The police had found documents in Victoria's office that revealed an even bigger scam involving other pharmaceutical companies. "The FBI wants your statement as soon as it's strong enough," James informed him. "This goes beyond Harrison Pharmaceuticals." When Charlotte reported the situation to Marcus, she expected to see concern on his face. Instead, she found determination. "Maybe that's it," he said, a new energy in his voice. "The opportunity to make the real difference my parents always dreamed of. Exposing the industry's unethical practices, promoting change." "Quite a crusade," Charlotte observed, checking her vital signs out of habit. "A mission," he corrected, holding his hand over the heart monitor. "And this time I'm surrounded by the right people." Dr. Chen, assessing Marcus's progress the next morning, noticed the change in his countenance. "Sometimes finding a greater purpose is the best medicine," she commented to Charlotte as they updated the charts. The mountains of Vermont remained imposing beyond the window, silent witnesses to a transformation that went far beyond physical recovery. It was a journey of rediscovery of values of purpose, and above all, of the healing power of true love. And as the snow began to fall softly outside, Marcus and Charlotte realized that some refugees are not made of walls and ceilings, but of mutual trust and shared commitment to something bigger than themselves. Snow was still falling on the Green Mountains when Catherine Walsh arrived at the Greenhaven Clinic, carrying a folder that would change the course of the investigation. Charlotte met her in the lobby, immediately noticing the grave expression on the lawyer's face. "We need to talk," Catherine said quietly. "In private." They headed for the clinic's small conference room where Dr. Chen was already waiting for them. Catherine spread out documents on the oak table, emails, financial reports, and most disturbingly, surveillance photos. "Amanda wasn't alone in Mexico," Catherine began. "She was meeting with executives from 3 other pharmaceutical companies. The scheme is much bigger than we imagined." Charlotte examined the photos, recognizing the faces of important pharmaceutical CEOs. "How long has this been going on?" "At least a decade," Catherine replied. Victoria was just one piece of the puzzle. They had been sabotaging promising research at several companies, manipulating data to keep expensive treatments on the market. Dr. Chen frowned as he examined some medical reports. "This explains why certain treatment protocols never made it to market despite promising preliminary results." The sound of footsteps in the hallway made the 3 women turn around. Marcus was standing in the doorway, stronger after 3 weeks of intensive treatment, but his face pale at the revelations. "How long have you been there?" Charlotte asked, instinctively moving towards him to check his vital signs. "Long enough," he replied, entering the room with determined steps. "Catherine, I want a virtual meeting with the board. Immediately." "Marcus," Charlotte protested, "you're still in recovery. And people are dying because treatments that could save them have been deliberately suppressed," he replied, his voice shaking with restrained emotion. "I can't stand by." Dr. Chen intervened with his medical authority. "Let's make a deal. The meeting takes place here under medical supervision and for a limited duration." An hour later, the conference room had been transformed into a makeshift command center. A large screen showed the tense faces of the remaining Harrison Pharmaceuticals board members, while FBI agents followed remotely. "Gentlemen," Marcus began, with Charlotte discreetly monitoring his vital signs, "what we've discovered goes far beyond a family dispute. Our company, along with others, has been infiltrated by people who put profit before human lives." Catherine methodically presented the evidence, revealing a network of corruption that stretched across the entire pharmaceutical sector. The faces on the screen grew paler and paler as the details emerged. "Starting today," Marcus continued, "Harrison Pharmaceuticals is going to lead a change in the industry. We're going to reopen every shelved project, review every suspect decision, and most importantly, we're going to go public with everything we uncover." "That will destroy the company," protested one of the directors. "No," Marcus replied firmly. "It will save it. It will bring us back to our original purpose, saving lives, not fortunes." The meeting went on for 2 hours, during which plans were drawn up and difficult decisions were made. When it finally ended, Marcus was exhausted, but his eyes shone with renewed determination. "You should be resting," Charlotte murmured as she helped him back to his suite. "How can I rest knowing that people died because treatments were deliberately suppressed?" he asked, his voice laden with guilt. Charlotte stopped forcing him to face her. "You were a victim too, Marcus. They tried to kill you when you started asking questions. And you saved me," he replied softly, touching her face. "Not just from the poison, but from the person I was becoming." A soft piano sound came from the solarium where other clinic patients gathered for evening music therapy. The snow continued to fall outside, creating a cocoon of peace around the property. "Do you know what else we found out?" Catherine asked, joining them with more documents. "Amanda had a history of relationships with pharmaceutical executives. You weren't the first, Marcus, just the one who resisted their scheme the most." The revelation hung in the air like the snow outside, gentle but with the power to completely transform the landscape. Marcus closed his eyes for a moment, processing yet another piece of the puzzle. "What do we do now?" Charlotte asked, her hand finding his instinctively. "Now," Marcus replied, opening his eyes with renewed determination, "we start to rebuild. Not just the company, but the trust that was broken. And this time, we'll do it the right way." Night was advancing in the Green Mountains, enveloping the clinic in a white blanket of snow. Inside, plans were made, truths were revealed, and a new chapter began to be written, not just for Marcus and Charlotte, but for all those whose lives would be touched by the courage to stand up to a system corrupted by power and greed. And as Charlotte made her final notes on the chart that night, she realized that she was witnessing more than one man's recovery. She was taking part in a transformation that could save countless lives. The love that had grown between them was just the beginning of something much bigger. News of the conspiracy in the pharmaceutical sector leaked to the press the following morning. Charlotte woke up to the sound of helicopters flying over the Green Haven Clinic news crews, desperately trying to capture images of the man who was threatening to expose one of the biggest corruption schemes in the pharmaceutical industry. "We need to move Marcus to a safer location," Dr. Chen insisted during an emergency meeting. "The exposure is affecting the therapeutic environment of all the patients." Catherine Walsh agreed already on the phone, organizing alternatives. "I have a secluded property in Lake Placid. We can set up an operational base there while we manage the crisis." Charlotte watched Marcus through the meeting room window. He was in the snow-covered garden, seemingly oblivious to the chaos. Forming around him, talking to another patient, a former CEO who had experienced a similar assassination attempt. "The FBI has identified 3 more similar cases." Catherine continued, spreading new files out on the table. "Executives who began to question certain practices and mysteriously developed rare conditions." "How many have died?" Charlotte asked, her voice trembling. "Slightly." 7 in the last 5 years, Catherine replied softly. "Marcus only survived because he had you," Dr. Chen added, looking at Charlotte. "Your attention to detail and genuine dedication broke their pattern." Charlotte's phone vibrated. It was a message from Elena Martinez. Amanda is speaking. She confessed everything, in exchange for a reduced sentence. Victoria didn't act alone. There were directors from other companies involved from the start. Outside, the helicopters continued to circle their propellers, cutting through the cold Vermont air. Charlotte went out to call Marcus, worried about his exposure to the cold. When she reached him, she saw that he was shivering, not from the cold, but from restrained emotion. "Mark Jensen," he said, indicating the man he was talking to, CEO of Medicorp until 2 years ago. He was also poisoned when he started investigating discrepancies in clinical trials. Charlotte greeted Mark with a professional nod, noticing the familiar signs of chronic toxicity in his appearance. "We need to get inside Marcus. We have news about the case." In the suite, while Charlotte adjusted his medication, Marcus absorbed the latest information about Amanda's confession. His expression alternated between pain and determination. "She said it was Victoria's idea from the start," Catherine explained, reading the notes from the statement. "To get close to you, to gain your trust, to monitor your decisions. The romance wasn't in the plans, it happened, but she used it to her advantage." "What about the others?" Marcus asked, his voice hoarse. "The treatments that were suppressed?" "Dozens," Catherine replied. "Some could have revolutionized the treatment of rare diseases, but they were shelved because they threatened more lucrative drug lines." Charlotte felt her heart squeeze at the sight of Marcus's devastated expression. Instinctively, she held his hand, offering silent support. "We need to act fast," Catherine continued. "The others involved are already trying to get ahead, preparing alternative narratives. We need your public version of the story." "No," Charlotte intervened firmly. "He's still recovering. Any additional stress could compromise him." "People are dying, Charlotte." Marcus interrupted her gently. "Every day we wait is another day we deny treatment to someone who needs it." Dr. Chen, who had joined them, offered an intermediate solution. "A single, controlled interview right here in the clinic. We can select a reliable journalist and set clear boundaries." The decision was made. Rachel Martinez, a respected investigative journalist from the Washington Post, would conduct the interview the following morning. During the evening, as they prepared their strategy, Charlotte noticed Marcus becoming increasingly introspective. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, adjusting her heart monitor for the night. "About how we were all pieces in a bigger game," he replied, looking out of the window at the snow that continued to fall. "Victoria, Amanda, me, all manipulated by a corrupt system that puts profit before lives." "But you chose differently," Charlotte reminded him. "When you discovered the truth, you chose to fight." Marcus turned to her, his eyes shining, with restrained emotion. "Because you showed me that there is another way. That compassion is not weakness, that integrity still matters." The snow outside created a cocoon of silence around the clinic, momentarily isolating them from the chaos to come. Tomorrow they would face the cameras, the questions, the accusations. But at that moment, there was only the truth between them, a truth built not on lies and manipulation, but on trust and genuine dedication. "We're going to change this," Charlotte promised, her voice firm despite the fear she felt. "We'll fix what they broke." Marcus nodded, and for the first time since the revelations began, a small smile appeared on his lips. Together, she confirmed, and the heart monitor registered a slight increase in both their heartbeats, not from anxiety or fear, but from hope for what was to come. The interview with Rachel Martinez of the Washington Post turned the quiet Greenhaven clinic into a media battleground. Strategically placed cameras captured Marcus's every expression as he revealed for the first time publicly the extent of the conspiracy that almost cost him his life. "When I realized that the numbers didn't add up in the research reports, I started asking questions." Marcus explained, his voice firm despite the fatigue evident in his eyes. "That's when the symptoms started." Charlotte watched from the periphery of the room, monitoring his vital signs via a discreet tablet. Each revelation seemed to take a toll on her energy, but Marcus was determined to tell her everything. We discovered that at least 12 promising treatments have been deliberately sabotaged over the last 5 years, he continued. Treatments that could have saved thousands of lives. Rachel. Martinez, a woman in her 40s with piercing eyes, leaned forward. And your wife, Amanda Harrison, was involved from the beginning. A heavy silence filled the room. Catherine Walsh, who was following the interview, made a small gesture indicating that Marcus could choose not to answer. But he continued. Amanda was put in my way as part of a bigger plan. His voice shook slightly. My sister Victoria coordinated with executives from other pharmaceutical companies to keep certain treatments off the market, preserving the monopoly on more profitable drugs. The revelations continued for 2 hours. When Rachel finally turned off her recorder, Marcus was visibly exhausted. Charlotte immediately approached, checking his vital signs. We need a break, she announced firmly, but Marcus held her arm. Not yet, he insisted. Rachel needs to see the documents, the evidence. Catherine intervened, spreading folders on the coffee table. We have records of bank transfers, coded emails, even recordings of clandestine meetings. While the journalist was examining the evidence, Dr. Chen entered the room with a worried expression. I just got a call from the FBI. Amanda has disappeared from federal custody. The news dropped like a bomb in the room. Charlotte instinctively moved closer to Marcus, whose heart monitor registered a rise in his heart rate. This changes everything, Catherine declared, already on the phone to her contacts. We need to transfer you to a secure location immediately. Rachel Martinez hurriedly put away her equipment. I'll hold the story for 24 hours, give you time to reorganize. But after that, the truth comes out. Marcus added, his determination visible despite his fatigue. The next few hours were a whirlwind of activity. FBI agents arrived at the clinic, setting up a security perimeter. Dr. Chen coordinated the transfer of other patients, protecting their privacy from the media circus that was forming at the gates. Lake Placid is no longer an option, Catherine reported during an emergency meeting. We need something safer, more secluded. I have a suggestion, Charlotte offered hesitantly. My family has a house on a small private island in Maine. Only local residents know its location. The idea was quickly evaluated and approved by the FBI agents. In less than 2 hours, a helicopter landed on the clinic's helipad, ready to transport them under cover of night. You don't. I have to come, Marcus said softly to Charlotte as they prepared to leave. You've already risked too much for my sake. Charlotte adjusted her coat against the icy wind of the helicopter's rotor. You still don't get it, do you? I'm not just here as your nurse. The flight to Maine was tense and quiet. Catherine took the time to update Marcus on the initial repercussions of the revelations. Several pharmaceutical companies had already issued statements distancing themselves from the scandal. Share prices were plummeting. The entire pharmaceutical market is in shock, she explained, showing the news on her tablet. But we already have 3 whistleblowers from other companies wanting to talk. The small island appeared on the horizon like a refuge in the middle of the dark ocean. The house, a wood and glass structure integrated into the coastal landscape, offered the discretion they needed. While the FBI agents set up a security perimeter, Charlotte guided Marcus through the familiar interior of the house. I spent every summer of my childhood here, she explained, turning on the heating system. It's the safest place I know. Marcus looked at the photographs on the walls, happy moments of the Edwards family memorials to a normal life that now seemed so far removed from their current reality. How did we get here? He muttered, more to himself than to Charlotte. By doing the right thing, she replied, preparing her nightly medication. And we're going to keep doing it, no matter what the cost. The sound of the waves against the rocks created a natural symphony that contrasted with the chaos they had left behind. As the night wore on, Marcus and Charlotte stayed awake, planning the next steps in a battle that had only just begun. The truth had its price, but it also had the power to heal. And there on that isolated island in Maine, two people whom fate had brought together in an unlikely way were preparing to face the consequences of exposing a corrupt system that had cost countless lives. Dawn on the island of Maine brought with it a dense fog that seemed to protect the Edwards house like a natural cloak. Charlotte woke up to the sound of her phone. Catherine Walsh had urgent news that would change the course of events. 3 Medicorp executives just turned themselves into the FBI. Catherine informed her voice tense even through the line. They have documents that prove Amanda hasn't disappeared, she's been eliminated. Charlotte felt her stomach turn. Across the hall, she could hear Marcus talking to the FBI agent standing guard. His voice sounded stronger today, as if each revelation, no matter how painful, served to strengthen her resolve. There's more, Catherine continued. The documents show a pattern of systematic elimination of people who threatened to expose the scheme. Victoria wasn't the mastermind, she was just a local enforcer of something much bigger. The pharmaceutical cartel, Marcus uttered from the doorway of the makeshift office, startling Charlotte. He had overheard part of the conversation. That's what they called themselves in coded emails. I found references years ago, but I thought it was just an internal term for the pharmaceutical lobby. Charlotte hung up the phone and immediately assumed her professional role, checking Marcus's vital signs. You should be resting. How can I rest? He asked, sitting down heavily in a worn leather armchair that overlooked the ocean. Amanda may have been many things, but her death is in my hands. If I hadn't started investigating. Stop, Charlotte interrupted him firmly, kneeling down beside him. You're not responsible for their actions. Amanda made her choices just like Victoria. The sound of the waves against the rocks filled the silences between their words, a constant reminder of the isolation that protected and imprisoned them at the same time. The agents found 3 more listening devices on the perimeter of the island. Marcus informed them, changing the subject. Someone knew we were coming here. Charlotte felt a shiver run down her spine. Her family home, her childhood refuge, no longer seemed so safe. Only my family knows about this place. And who else had access to the property records? Marcus asked softly, his analytical mind already working through the possibilities. The answer struck Charlotte like a thunderbolt. The law firm that handled my father's inventory, Bennett and Associates. The same firm that represented 3 of the largest pharmaceutical companies in the country, Marcus added, his voice laden with painful understanding. The phone rang again. It was Rachel Martinez from the Washington Post. The story was ready for publication, but she had discovered more connections that needed to be verified. We have records of suspicious deaths in 5 different states, Rachel explained over the speakerphone, all connected to people working on promising research for rare diseases, all filed as accidents or natural causes. Marcus closed his eyes, absorbing the weight of this information. Charlotte could see his heart monitor registering an increase in his heart rate, but this time it wasn't just stress, it was indignation. How many lives, he muttered. How many people died because they developed treatments that threatened their profits? The sound of a helicopter cut through the air, making everyone freeze for a moment, until they confirmed that it was just the FBI team changing. The tension was palpable, every unusual noise a potential sign of danger. Catherine is organizing a press conference, Charlotte reported, checking her messages. As soon as the Washington Post publishes the story, other whistleblowers will be ready to speak. It will be a domino effect. And we'll be the first domino to fall. Marcus observed a sad smile on his lips. You can still get out, Charlotte. Go back to your normal, safe life. Charlotte approached him, her mind made up long ago. My normal life ended the moment I discovered the truth. I can't pretend that I don't know what I know, that I didn't see what I saw. An FBI agent quickly entered the office. Sir, we've intercepted a communication. There's a team approaching by sea. We need to move them now. The contingency plan was activated immediately. While the agents prepared the evacuation, Charlotte gathered Marcus's essential medicines and important documents. Years of experience as a nurse had prepared her to act calmly in emergencies. Where are we going? She asked, as she helped Marcus put on his coat. "Alaska," replied the agent. "We have a secure facility in a remote location. You'll stay there until we can ensure that everyone involved has been identified and neutralized." Through the window, Charlotte could see the waves getting rougher, as if the ocean itself was responding to the tension of the moment. Within hours, the Washington Post story would explode onto the internet, exposing decades of corruption and crimes against humanity. "Are you ready?" Marcus asked, holding her hand as they prepared to leave the house. Charlotte looked one last time at the photographs on the walls, memories of a simpler life that now seemed to belong to someone else. "Ready to change the—" "Aujourd'hui, one treatment at a time," he replied, and for the first time that day her smile reached her eyes. The helicopter was waiting its propellers, cutting through the mist that still hung over the island. It was time to face the next phase of their journey, no longer just as nurse and patient, but as partners in a mission bigger than themselves. Alaska welcomed Marcus and Charlotte with a violet aurora borealis sky, a natural spectacle that contrasted dramatically with the chaos they had left behind. The secure FBI facility disguised as a climate research center near Fairbanks emerged from the frozen landscape like a modern fortress of glass and steel. The Washington Post story broke all access records, Catherine reported via the secure video conference, her image occasionally distorted by the satellite connection. 12 CEOs have been arrested in the last 6 hours. The director of the FDA has resigned. Charlotte methodically organized the new makeshift medical space while watching Marcus absorb the news. His face was more flushed today, the signs of the poisoning gradually disappearing under the continuous treatment. "The files we found in Victoria's house revealed something even more disturbing," Catherine continued. "They weren't just suppressing treatments, they were purposely developing less effective versions of existing drugs. To force patients to remain dependent on ongoing treatments," Marcus added, his voice laced with disgust, "turning curable diseases into profitable chronic conditions." An FBI agent, Lisa Harrison, no relation to Marcus, entered the communications room with new reports. "We've identified 3 clandestine labs where they were testing these adulterated versions, one of them in Nevada, another in Mexico, and a third in Vancouver." "What about Amanda?" Charlotte asked, noticing how Marcus tensed when he heard his ex-wife's name. "We've confirmed it," Lisa replied softly. "Body found in Tijuana. She had a USB stick with more evidence. Apparently she was planning her own plea bargain." Marcus's heart monitor registered a subtle change, and Charlotte immediately moved to his side. He held her hand, seeking anchorage amidst the storm of revelations. "We need to release this information strategically," Catherine advised. "Each new revelation is triggering a wave of internal denunciations. Employees at all levels are looking for the FBI." "What about Harrison Pharmaceuticals?" Marcus asked, his voice steady despite his obvious exhaustion. "The stock is down 60%, but something interesting is happening," Catherine replied, a slight smile forming on her face. "Small investors are buying, ordinary people who believe in your vision of reshaping the company." The sound of helicopters cut through the conversation, yet another security team arriving with specialized medical equipment. Charlotte had insisted on maintaining Marcus's treatment, even in the midst of the chaos, refusing to allow the conspiracy to take another life. "Dr. Reynolds is on his way," Lisa reported. "He's going to personally supervise the next phase of your treatment here." When they were alone again, Charlotte noticed Marcus watching the aurora borealis through the screened windows. "What are you thinking about?" she asked, adjusting her blanket. "About how the truth is like that light in the sky," he replied thoughtfully. "Impossible to contain once it starts to shine." An alert on her tablet interrupted the moment. More test results coming in. Charlotte scrutinized them with professional attention, but couldn't hold back a smile. "Your levels are almost normal," she announced. "The detox protocol is working better than we expected." "Thanks to you," Marcus replied, turning to face her. "Not just for the medical treatment, but for giving me the strength to face this." The moment was interrupted by another call from Catherine. More executives were turning themselves in, offering evidence in exchange for deals. The pharmaceutical cartel was crumbling like a house of cards. I got an interesting call from MIT, Catherine mentioned. They want to establish an independent research center to review all the treatments that have been suppressed. They want you on the advisory board, Marcus. On one condition, he replied, looking meaningfully at Charlotte. I want a division dedicated to training health professionals to identify and report unethical practices in the pharmaceutical industry. Charlotte felt her heart race at the implication. It wasn't just about exposing the truth, it was about creating a system to prevent something like this from happening again. The night advanced in Alaska, the sky dancing with unearthly colors. While the world outside processed the revelations that were changing the pharmaceutical industry forever, Marcus and Charlotte found strength in each other to continue their battle. You know what's ironic, Marcus commented as Charlotte prepared her nightly medication. Victoria and Amanda tried to destroy me, but they ended up freeing me. Freeing all of us. Charlotte adjusted the heart monitor. One last time, her hands as gentle and professional as ever, but now carrying something more, a promise of the future, a certainty of shared purpose. Sometimes, she replied softly, we need to lose everything to find what really matters. Outside, the aurora borealis continued its silent spectacle, witness to a transformation that went far beyond two people in an icy refuge. It was the beginning of a new era in medicine, built on the ruins of an empire of lies. The atmosphere at the FBI facility in Fairbanks was electrically charged that morning. Dr. Reynolds had just completed an intensive battery of tests on Marcus, and the results were more promising than anyone had dared hope. It's almost a medical miracle, the doctor explained, showing Charlotte the scans. Your toxicity levels have dropped to practically zero. The protocol you've developed could save other victims. Marcus, sitting on the edge of the examination bed, absorbed the news while watching Charlotte review the results with her usual attention to detail. It wasn't a miracle, he said softly. It was science combined with genuine dedication. Catherine Walsh appeared on the video conference screen, her face scarred by sleepless nights, but with a gleam of triumph in her eyes. The last cartel board member has just turned himself in, and he's brought something you need to see. With a few commands, Catherine shared on the screen a series of secret meetings recorded over years, showing executives coldly discussing which treatments should be suppressed in order to maximize profits. They kept a detailed archive, Catherine continued, a kind of mutual insurance. If one fell, they all fell. Charlotte felt her stomach turn as she recognized familiar faces in the video's CEOs she had seen in TV commercials promoting their companies as lifesavers. The hypocrisy was nauseating. There's more. Lisa Harrison entered the room with a tablet. We found the complete records of the tests with adulterated versions of drugs. Hundreds of patients were unknowingly used as guinea pigs. Marcus stood up abruptly, his renewed strength fueled by indignation. I want to talk to them. Personally. Marcus, Charlotte protested, but he held up his hand. Not as a CEO, not as a victim, he explained. As someone who understands the system from the inside and can help change it completely. A series of meetings was quickly organized via secure video conferencing. While the FBI coordinated depositions in 5 different states, Marcus and Charlotte worked with a team of MIT scientists to review each suppressed treatment. This one, Charlotte pointed to a specific file, could have revolutionized the treatment of rare autoimmune diseases. It was shelved because it threatened a line of drugs that generated billions annually. And how many lives could have been saved? Marcus asked rhetorically, his voice laden with restrained emotion. The day progressed in a whirlwind of revelations and planning. Catherine coordinated with federal prosecutors while Dr. Reynolds and Charlotte finalized the documentation of the treatment protocol that had saved Marcus. We need a name for the protocol, Dr. Reynolds commented. For the medical publication, Edwards Protocol, Marcus suggested immediately, looking at Charlotte. Because it was your insight that made all the difference. Charlotte blushed slightly but maintained her professionalism. The important thing is that he'll be available to anyone who needs him. As the evening approached, news kept coming in. More executives turning themselves in, more documents being uncovered, more lives being impacted by the cascade of truths they had unleashed. Congress is calling a special hearing, Catherine informed us. They want you as their star witness, Marcus, and Charlotte too. The prospect of facing a congressional committee was intimidating, but something had changed in both of them during those weeks in Alaska. Fear had given way to a greater purpose. "You know what's funny?" Marcus commented as they watched the aurora borealis that night. "Victoria and Amanda thought they were destroying me, but they were actually laying the groundwork for something much bigger." Charlotte adjusted her heart rate monitor, now more out of habit than necessity. Sometimes we need to lose everything to find our true mission. An urgent email from Rachel Martinez interrupted the moment. The Washington Post was preparing a special series on the victims of the cartel families who had lost loved ones because effective treatments were deliberately denied. "They want us to coordinate a compensation fund," Catherine explained, "to use the resources recovered to help these families." Marcus nodded, his mind already working through the possibilities. "Not just financial compensation. We want to ensure that they have access to the treatments they were denied. And most importantly, we want their voices to be heard." Alaska had become more than a refuge. It was a place of rebirth. They're protected by isolation and the austere beauty of nature. Marcus and Charlotte were helping to redesign the future of the pharmaceutical industry. "Tomorrow we start preparations for Washington," Lisa informed them. "Security will be maximum." Charlotte was organizing the medical documents they would be carrying, each page a testimony to the battle they had fought. "Are we really ready for this?" Marcus held her hand, his touch conveying more than words could express. "Together, we're ready for anything." The aurora borealis continued its silent show, as if blessing the mission they had embraced. A mission that had begun with a dedicated nurse and a poisoned businessman, and had now become a crusade for justice and transformation. The Capitol Hill hearing room was packed that historic morning in Washington, D.C. Marcus Harrison, wearing an impeccable navy blue suit, sat next to Charlotte Edwards before the Senate Health Committee. The buzz of the crowd ceased when the committee, Chair Senator Eleanor Mitchell, banged her gavel to start the session. "We are here today," the senator began, "to hear testimony on what the press is calling the biggest scandal in the history of the pharmaceutical industry." Charlotte watched Marcus discreetly monitoring his vital signs through the tablet on her lap. 3 months had passed since the first revelations in Alaska, and his recovery was almost complete, but she still maintained her professional vigilance. "Mr. Harrison," the senator continued, "could you tell us how you discovered the existence of the so-called pharmaceutical cartel?" Marcus leaned towards the microphone, his firm voice echoing through the chamber. "It all started with a discrepancy in research reports, promising treatments that mysteriously disappeared, data that didn't make sense. But the real revelation came when I started showing unexplained symptoms." Catherine Walsh, sitting behind, then passed documents to the senators, emails, financial reports, taped confessions. Each page revealed another layer of the elaborate corruption scheme. "Ms. Edwards," another senator spoke up, "as Mr. Harrison's private nurse, when did you suspect something was wrong?" Charlotte took a deep breath before answering. "It was a pattern of symptoms that didn't correspond to any known disease. I began to document every change, every anomaly. What I found suggested systematic poisoning." The next few hours were filled with detailed testimony. Marcus described how Victoria and Amanda had been pieces in a much bigger game manipulated by executives who saw human lives only as numbers in profit spreadsheets. "So far," Catherine intervened, "we have identified 347 treatments that have been deliberately suppressed. Medicines that could have saved thousands of lives have been shelved because they threatened more profitable product lines." A murmur of outrage ran through the room. In the galleries, families of victims held photographs of lost loved ones' lives that could have been saved if greed had not prevailed over ethics. "And what is your proposal to prevent this from happening again?" asked Senator Mitchell. Marcus and Charlotte exchanged a meaningful look before he answered. "We are establishing the Harrison Edwards Institute for Ethical Medical Innovation, an independent organization that will review every suppressed treatment, develop new safety protocols, and train healthcare professionals to identify and report unethical practices. The protocol that saved Marcus's life," Charlotte added, "is already being used to treat other victims of corporate poisoning. But this is only the beginning." The hearing lasted until late afternoon. When it finally ended, Marcus and Charlotte were surrounded by reporters in the hallway of the Capitol. Rachel Martinez from the Washington Post managed a final question. "How do you see the future of the pharmaceutical industry after these revelations?" Marcus held Charlotte's hand, a gesture that didn't go unnoticed by the cameras. "We see a future where medicine returns to its original purpose, healing people, not generating profits at any cost." Back at the hotel in Georgetown, while Charlotte did her last vital signs check of the day, Marcus watched the lights of the Capitol from the window. "You know what's ironic," he commented. "They tried to kill me, but they ended up giving me a greater purpose for living." "Oh, sometimes," Charlotte replied, putting away her medical equipment. "We need to face the worst of humanity to find the best in ourselves." The phone rang. It was Dr. Reynolds with the latest test results. "Officially," he announced, "you're completely toxin-free, Marcus." The Edwards protocol was a complete success. As night fell over Washington, Marcus and Charlotte planned the next steps. The institute would open in Boston the following month. Dozens of scientists and researchers had already offered to take part. The transformation they had initiated was just beginning. "Charlotte," Marcus called out softly, "have you ever thought that our meeting was no accident, that perhaps all this suffering had a greater purpose?" She smiled, remembering the 2 years as a private nurse the moment she discovered the truth, the flight to Alaska, and everything they had built together since then. "I believe that some people are destined to change the world," she replied, "but they need to find each other first." The future still held challenges. There would be resistance attempts to maintain the status quo, but something fundamental had changed. The truth once revealed had a power of its own, and there in the city that represented so much power and so many secrets, a new chapter was beginning, not just for Marcus and Charlotte, but for all those who believed that medicine should be about saving lives, not fortunes. "Together?" Marcus asked, holding out his hand. "Always," Charlotte replied, entwining her fingers with his. The dawn would bring new challenges, new battles to be fought. But now they had something stronger than any conspiracy they had: the truth, each other, and a purpose that transcended their own lives. Their story, which had begun with a dedicated nurse and a poisoned businessman, had grown into something much bigger, a movement that promised to change the face of modern medicine forever. And as the lights of Washington shone outside Marcus and Charlotte knew that this wasn't the end of their journey. It was just the beginning of a new mission, one they would continue to share for the rest of their lives.